Thanks for staying with us. I'm Eric Bowling in for Bill O'Reilly. And in the Factor follow-up segment tonight, dealing with Iran. Over the weekend, the regime announced it executed a nuclear scientist who was convicted of spying for the United States. Shahram Amiri defected to the USA, but later returned to Iran in 2010 under murky circumstances. And in another twist in this case, he was also the subject of some of the emails made public during the Hillary Clinton private server scandal.
You mentioned the Iranian scientist that was recently executed. Now, of course, I'm not going to comment on what he may or may not have done for the United States government. But in the emails that were on Hillary Clinton's private server, there were conversations among her senior advisors about this gentleman. That goes to show just how reckless and careless her decisions was to put that kind of highly classified information on a private server. And I think her judgment is not suited to keep this country safe.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Cliff May, the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and from Houston, Arash Aramesh, a national security and foreign policy analyst. Arash, let me start with you. So, do you think that mentioning or referencing this nuclear scientist in Iran on Hillary Clinton's emails was partly responsible for her death, his death? Sorry.
No, completely irrelevant. They arrested this guy in late 2010 when he returned to Iran. On July 12, 2010, this is when he was still in the United States, when he was still here, quote unquote, cooperating with us. Hillary Clinton and the State Department announced that this guy is here on his own free will. He can leave. What was his story? His story was that he was kidnapped in Saudi Arabia by the U.S. intelligence and the Saudi intelligence and brought here and coerced for information. When the Iranian regime arrested his wife and put a lot of pressure on his family, and this guy got a little homesick and saw this sort of extreme pressure and violence coming from the Iranian regime that is well known and well documented for its human rights abuses, he just left and went back. As soon as he returned to Iran, he was arrested and he was in prison until just a week ago, and then he was executed.
Right, but Cliff, if he had kept that story alive and if we hadn't kind of refuted that story in certain emails, then maybe he would still be alive.
Well, that's hard to say. Look, I think there are a few things you can conclude. Objectively, was it wrong for Hillary Clinton to have a personal server? I think objectively we have to agree it was. Was it reckless for her to have a personal server? That's more subjective, but I would agree with Tom Cotton. It was a reckless thing to do. Did any emails that she had over this server contribute in any way to the fact that Shahram Amiri was hanged? I think that's purely speculative. I don't think we can conclude that.
Okay, do you think there's, Arash, do you think there's more? I'm clearly over 33,000 or even the 30,000 she hasn't turned over. There were a lot of names mentioned. If I'm one of those people mentioned and I'm a spy, boy, I'm a little nervous now.
You know, I have a lot more faith, at least, in the abilities of the State Department and other law enforcement and intelligence agencies to go through these emails and redact names. What I do have a problem with, and unfortunately doesn't get a lot of coverage, is people like Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, or a traitor named Snowden, who goes out and publishes thousands and thousands, especially WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who is now after Hillary Clinton.
But that is an inherent risk. That is an inherent risk of having your own server that some outside hacker can hack in and read what you're reading. Writing.
As Clifford said, I mean that's a different point. The question at hand here is whether this sort of action and this sort of maneuvering puts Americans at risk. And what really put Americans at risk was after WikiLeaks, when names of thousands of people who come to U.S. embassies around the world to do sort of deep cover or behind the scenes sort of dialogue with American diplomats and American political officers there were published. And this sort of irresponsible behavior by WikiLeaks and a treasonous act, just what Snowden did.
But Cliff, isn't that part of the problem?
Is that very short-term memories? But just one last point. I mean, this sort of conspiracy thinking, trying to link everything to Hillary Clinton. I mean, some people would pretty soon have you believe that she was behind the Kennedy assassination.
No, but this has always been. This is not a conspiracy link.
Hillary Clinton. I mean, it just has to stop at some point.
Cliff, I'll let you take this, but that is one of the major risks of having your own private email server. If it's not as secure as a State Department server, you risk outside hackers getting information. Period. Right? What am I
Look,
missing?
No question this was a bad idea for her to have this server. I think people recognize that. I think that shows up in the polls in terms of her ratings on honesty and on trust. All of that is true. I don't think this particular occurrence is going to change the polls at all or change perceptions at all. But I want to make sure we don't miss the major point here. This guy was hanged because it is believed by the Iranians that he gave information to the Americans on Iran's nuclear program. If that nuclear program is peaceful, as the Iranians insist, then why in the world would they hang him for having provided information on it? That is the key point, and it shows that the agreement made with Iran is fundamentally flawed. And I don't believe the Iranians are abiding by it. Look, they've got a justice system that you know has no justice in it. And that's just when this was announced that he was being hanged, what did the Iranian spokesman say? That America is their enemy number one and the great Satan.
They've never said anything else. They've never said anything else other than we are the enemy and that we're the ones that they would love to see eradicated along with Israel.
I think that's the most important point.
Go ahead, Iran had a dangerous nuclear program, and Cliff is right. Iran had a dangerous nuclear program about a year away from breakout capacity and capability. And guess what? We should thank President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the State Department for putting together a deal that has put a stop to this dangerous Iranian nuclear program.
Why? Because you think now, Arash, now you think they're going to abide by the sanctions of the deal?
We know they're not abiding by many of their obligations. The missile launches are that.
That is just not true. That is
the missile launches, as you know. Look, let me get to this point. Let me get to this point, and you can answer it, Arash. Sure. We know that this agreement gives Iran a patient pathway to nuclear weapons in about a dozen years. That is a mistake because we cannot believe that this regime will be different in 10 years. It will still consider us the great Satan, and it will still want genocide for Israel.
Before we go.
The regime in Tehran is a terrible regime. We imposed heavy sanctions. We brought them back to the negotiating table on their knees. And guess what? According to most observers and nuclear watchdogs, including the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran, those bad guys have lived up to their commitments.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there. A lot of this stuff is up for debate, though. I will tell you, that debate is not over. Gentlemen, thank you very much.